All right, just coming back to film another video here. I'm gonna try and fix this camera real quick. There we go. Film another video here on volume and intensity, and just kind of explain more based off of the periodization video. And I mentioned different concepts that get involved with periodization, um, exercise selection, volume intensity. I mentioned some other things, and I'll have to go back and see exactly what I mentioned because I ideally like all these videos to tie in. But I thought the easiest place to start was in general intensity and volume. Um, I guess specifically because the sub seems more oriented, or Discord seems more oriented towards um, weightlifting, but you can still apply these kind of ideas into your generalized training. Um, Although I will probably try to make a more advanced, and I use that loosely because if I understand it, I don't think it's that advanced uh, video to go over how you would tie in, say, the physical training with a, say, athlete or like MMA athlete, because I know there's a few of you in the sub, and how do you tie that in together for your own training. But with that said, these next few videos will be rather simple. So again, long diatribe there to just explain something really simple. Hopefully this video doesn't take too long like I typically do. So first, I started intensity and volume. I think a lot of people typically think of them as this dichotomous relationship where it's one or the other, and in fact it's both, right? So just get the shirt or jacket off here. Um, you can't have one without the other. One without the other is kind of meaningless. They're just descriptors or ideas of something. So, and you can apply them to anything, right? So intensity and volume, we're going to think of it in the case of sets and reps and percentages, et cetera, et cetera. But if we wanted to say take it to a field sport and the conditioning side of things, it's simply how hard versus how much, okay? So how hard is something? Okay, 80%. Okay, that's a how hard descriptor because it's a percentage of our 1RM versus how much for 3 sets of 2. Okay, um, but that 80% at 3 sets of 2 isn't necessarily the same total physiological load as 80% at 3 sets of 4, right? That just makes sense because you're doing more total work. But if we wanted to take it to a field athlete or something like conditioning, let's take the example of like a tempo run, right? How hard? 70% of your maximal sprint speed. How much? 3 sets of 3 across 50 meters. Boom, problem solved. That you have your how hard. How hard are you running versus how much are you running, right? So I'll just get into it. I prefer to start with intensity. I think it's slightly easier than volume just because the amount of stuff I've listened to as far as volume, they get really into the weeds on, and there's just so many debates on what matters, what doesn't, but I'll just start with intensity. So the easiest way to think of it is percentage of 1RM or percentage of training max, okay? A lot of people use training maxes. 531 uses training maxes. There's other programs that use training maxes, but in short, it's just a way to kind of down regulate everything so you don't have to deload as frequently so that you're not training at maximal capacity every single lift. So it's just another way to create submaximal training. And I'll get into why submaximal training works probably in a video following this that will just be on different progressions. Or maybe at the end, I'll just tie it in. But different percentages, right? So typically different percentages are going to correspond to different training outcomes better than others, right? So that doesn't mean, don't be the guy who thinks because I'm training at 80%, I can't grow because 70% is considered optimal for hypertrophy, right? That doesn't mean that. It just means that if I were only considering hypertrophy, 80% shouldn't be where I'm training most of the time, right? That's what optimal means. But even then, there's a lot of room for nuance within that. So different percentages correspond to different things. Like, for example, maximal strength. You're going to have to train around 90% or above 90%, at least at some point. if you're training power, say like Olympic lifts, or um, let's say like dynamic effort lifts in a conjugate system or a typical West Side system, you would train somewhere around 80%. Okay, 80 to 85%. And the reason for this is the bar speed. The bar speed and the amount of effort we can push into the bar corresponds best to power outcomes. Okay, the power and maximal strength aren't quite the same thing. I'll get into another video on kind of a yearly periodization cycle, but just in general, just keep that in mind for the future. Whereas say 70% around there might be best for hypertrophy, and 60% to 40% might be best for muscular endurance. Okay, those are just general broad ranges. They're not actual specific truths that they only apply to that range, right? Because if you're in a caloric surplus and you do 80% for 4 sets of 4 on a squat, your quads are going to get bigger. That's just a fact, okay? If you continuously train 3 sets of 8 and then 4 sets of 8 and then 3 sets of 10 and then 3 sets of 12 at 70% and you keep pushing reps and total sets, at some point you're going to get stronger, right? So you go from 185 for say 6 reps to 185 for 15 reps, you definitely got stronger along the way, right? So it's not just as simple, I have to train at this percentage to get this desired outcome. It's just, say in the example of powerlifting, if you spend all your time training in 8 to 10 rep range, you're not going to be very good at the kind of lifting required for powerlifting, right? Like it's a 1 RM. That's a skill. There's still a neurological component. There's still a movement skill acquisition component, right? So you still need to train those higher percentages. But if you set a 10 RM and let's say you set a 10 RM by like 30 pounds, you probably got stronger on your 1 RM too. You just have to then refine that total work that you put in. Okay. So getting into moving past percentages, because I think that's the easiest way to understand it. Autoregulation. I'll start with RPEs and RIR. Basically, they're the inverse of each other. Someone's going to see this and then get really pissy about it and then say something to the effect of that's not true. But in short, that's the way I think about it. Okay. So all they're meant to do is just on any given day, right? We can't always be 100%. So all autoregulation's purpose is to then train at whatever that maximal extent of capacity I have on that day. So let's say it's an RPE 8. That means on that day, for whatever I hit, I should have two reps left over, right? So I'm still getting a desired training outcome and I'm still progressing and I'm still hitting the planned workload. It just might be 20 pounds under or it might be 20 pounds over. It's just a way to account for the kind of fluctuations in daily and weekly and hell, even monthly periods of readiness. Okay. So RIR works in reverse, right? So if it's RPE 8, technically you should have about 2 reps left in the tank. Well, RIR is reps in reserve. So 2 RIR is the same as RPE 8. In short, someone's going to get really pissy that I said that, but that's functionally how it works. So the reason you would use autoregulation, and you should use autoregulation, is for the most part, once you get past a kind of beginner level, any planned maxes that you hit, like let's say you go into a meet and you hit your numbers, you peaked for that meet. You're not going to be able to have that physical output the entire rest of, say, the next 18 weeks, right? That was a planned period for you to hit your best numbers. Okay. This is the same reason someone might use a training max based off of that 1 RM. Okay. So all it's meant to do is just account for fluctuations of an individual's readiness on any given day, but still hit the kind of prescribed work that we want to get the desired outcome. So if it's, say, RPE 8 at 2x2, I'm going to kind of infer that we're looking more towards top end maximal strength side of things. Okay, that's just kind of an inference based off what RPE 8 would mean at a 2x2, because a 2x2, okay, RPE 8, that means I should have 2 left over. That means I'm probably close to 90%, if not above it, right? So it's just a way of getting that desired physiological output for that given day. Because on that day, let's say your max is 100 pounds, and you're you're so concerned with hitting 90% that day, so 90 pounds, but you can't get it, right? Because your body's not adapted, it's not recovered well. Something's going on. So you only hit 80% of that 2x2. Well, if that 80% is actually, if that 80 pounds, right? 80 pounds of 100, 80% of 100 is 80 pounds. If that 80 pounds is 90% of what you have of your capacity on that day, you're still going to get the desired outcome. That's just a fact. You're getting the same level of stress input on the system based off what you have on that given session, and you're getting the same output, right? You're still putting the same amount of force production. You're still accruing the same kind of hormonal response. You're still getting the same skill acquisition. Okay. So you're getting all the same inputs, but now it allows for a little better fluctuations, a little bit better readiness. And then, I mean, ideally, you don't have to deload as much because you're auto regulating across a period. There will be down periods in which we're not doing as much, but I don't think it would be considered a true deload. But I will say, I do mention RPE versus IRR, but you can auto regulate in a percentage system, anyways, too. Like, one thing I do is on any given day, if I really feel like good, I'll allow myself to bump it up at max 2%. Okay. But that can be a lot. 2% could be a whole nother 5 to 10 pounds, which could turn something that's supposed to be 2 reps into, 1 rep. Okay. But if I feel really good, it might be something I could do for 4. It just kind of depends. But if I feel trash because, school sucks, or, your girlfriend's arguing with you, I might bump it down 5% to still handle the workloads I'm trying to hit. Okay. So that's just a kind of short end justification for why auto regulation is important. VBT I included as its own kind of section because there's VBT is cool. Okay, but not everyone can do it, right? You have to have a Tendo unit. You have to have some sort of bar speed tracker. Okay, there's Bluetooth ones, and then there's actual like cord ones, and I'm pretty sure the cord ones probably work significantly better, but I couldn't tell you 100% that's true. But VBT, or velocity based training, is a way to auto regulate. There's specific bar speeds that are set, or not set, specific bar speeds that correspond to different physiological outputs. So different bar speeds that work better for maximal strength development, for strength speed developments, for speed strength developments, towards max speed developments. So there's all these different bar velocity ranges. But again, what if you're not 100% on that day? Can you train to 100% of whatever your best is on that day? Absolutely. But that's how VBT works. Okay. And that's true of every autoregulatory system. You have to be consistent in its application. So you can't just say, oh, I'm tired, so therefore I'm not going to train my hardest and call that RPE. You're not getting its true impact. Same thing with VBT. Like, you have to have the most force output possible into the bar for it to work, right? Because it's tracking that. It's literally tracking how fast you're moving the bar. How much force are you putting into the bar? So if you're half-assing it one day, wow, the weights are really moving slow. You need to assess whether or not you're actually pushing the bar as hard as you can, or if you're just kind of being a dickwit about it, okay? So just a consideration within VBT. I don't want to cover that as much just because you can get into some cool nuances with it, but also I just don't see its necessity necessarily in powerlifting on my side of things, but I do think it's a cool auto-regulatory idea, or not idea, way of doing things. But again, you have to have specific equipment, so I don't think it's as pertinent to the Discord as a whole. So the last thing I wanted to kind of include is enols, and I wanted to include them. This will be brief because I'm getting into them myself. I'm going to start using them more, but it's intensity plus number of lifts, enol. Okay, so it's just based off this 2005 study where they kind of made this. They collected a bunch of data off people's training and had people train in the study, and they kind of compiled this table and correspondence based off that for kind of low end thresholds for, like, is this enough work? Is this too much work? Or is this in the middle? And it's a range, so it's not, there's a specific number you have to get out of the equation for this, which I'll probably share in the Discord for where I'm getting this material from. but it's a nice way of just tracking, right? But as with all tracking, it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive, okay? So eNOLs, in a sense, will be prescriptive, but it's not always going to be 100% accurate on that day, right? So if I'm using percentages, because you do use percentages for eNOLs, if it's 80% on that day, but it's 80% based off, say, a 6-month-old max, probably not going to be 100% accurate, okay? For what you're trying to get out of it. Moving on, okay? Volume. There's a few different ways to look at volume. Um, one of them, total workload, okay? So total pound. Let's say you use a West Side system and you have your dynamic effort day 10 sets of 2 at 50%, not counting band tension chains or anything like that. 200 pounds, so that's our 50%, your 400-pound squatter. That means in 10 sets of 2, you move 4,000 pounds, okay? It's actually kind of, I wouldn't say a lot, but it's a good bit of work done if you consider that maybe you had 30 seconds of rest. 4,000 pounds in 30, 5 minutes of work, that's pretty good, okay? I don't really use this as much. I think it's a cool thing to just look at, but I don't necessarily know how you use it to then assess a level of readiness or preparation. Um, Again, I think this falls more into descriptive versus prescriptive. Cool to look at. I don't necessarily know, like, do I then next week have to hit 4,500 pounds, 500 or 5,000 the next week? I just don't know how it would progress. But it is a way you can look at total. Um, Other thing, number of reps, right? Everyone's always concerned with number of reps. 8 to 12 is the optimal hypertrophy range. Not true. I mean, you should train in a variety of rep ranges, and I'll leave it at that. There's probably 8 to 12 reps is probably a good range for getting the kind of mechanical tension across the muscle that you want to grow, but it's not like it's the only rep range in which you'll grow. So there's actually an article on strongerbyscience.com in which they kind of go over this. It's actually from like 2014. I think it's a really good piece, but it leads into number of hard sets probably being a better descriptor of the work. So again, we're number of hard sets. That's kind of telling me something about intensity. Okay, so hard obviously means there's a threshold. Um, so just kind of going into the number of hard sets, this is just literally how it sounds. If 1 week you hit 3 hard sets on a muscle and then you did 4 and then you did 5 hard sets across the next 2 weeks, okay, well then that's technically progressive overload, right? We're adding more work to do. Just some concepts: maximal recover volume, maximal adaptive volume, minimum effective volume. These are concepts that come from Renaissance periodization, and they're just kind of structural guidelines for how you progress using number of hard sets. So maximal recoverable, maximal adaptive, and then minimum effective. So if we start a training block, we might want to be more down towards minimum effective and then work more towards maximal recoverable across the training block. And then obviously deload and reset, and then et cetera, et cetera. Because the assumption is if by time you get the work done from minimum effective to maximum recoverable, your threshold will then be higher, or you add more weight the next cycle, or you add more reps, right? It's just a structural guideline for how do we progress to get the most out of our hypertrophy training week to week, month to month. Okay. So just getting into that though, some considerations on progressions. There's a recent podcast I wouldn't necessarily recommend listening to because it's not like they really disagree that much, but Helms versus Israel, and they kind of discuss different progressions. So if we look at it totally from number of hard sets, then obviously the way to progress week to week is then adding sets. 1 set of 10, maybe that was my hard set for the week. Okay. 2 sets of hard sets the next week. Okay. But Eric Helms kind of contrasts it and says, well, you could still feasibly grow from 1 hard set if you added just 2 more reps to the set, or maybe three or 4. Okay. So it's just a different way of going about it. I think this bottom way is more of a slow burn approach, which personally I like. I like building more momentum over time and really kind of juicing the grape. Neither way is wrong. Okay. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is it's just the progression that each person favors within that. Okay, so how that looks across uh, week to week considerations. But in short, I think these are kind of hard to understand without actually. These are just conceptual level, but obviously you guys are more concerned with programming. So how does it look? Um, how does it look in an actual training cycle? Okay, so I'll make that another video and I'll record that right after this one so we understand it.